Today we're going to be approaching some very delicate topics as we continue our Living the Dream of an Oak Church series. We've talked about some of them before in how Augustine changed the nature of the church and the various other people who brought that more imperialistic spirit in. But today we're going to be addressing the why. And to talk about that, we're going to have to talk about unclean spirits and trauma. Unclean spirits are not the demons from your TV shows and movies. They're not the ones from folklore. They're those things that haunt our memories and try to continue to do us harm, even when we don't know or are unaware of their presence. So before we get started, I'd like to ask you all just to take a deep breath with me. And we're going to approach this one with peace and grace as we discuss the trauma of the church and unclean spirits as we walk together down CreationSpirituality. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie, and I am a Christopagan and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid, sous chef to the dogma.
Today, we're going to be talking about unclean spirits and the collective trauma that the church still carries with it today that's causing harm to people some 2,000 years later. Remember, we're here in a spirit of grace and utterly free of shame because there is a lot of pain that's been left unresolved in the Christian movement. If we're going to have a hope of reconstructing and reclaiming something valid and true from the heart of this faith, we're going to have to face these demons head on. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. We do 5 original Christopagan and Druid episodes Monday through Friday, and you don't want to miss a thing. We've got a lot of interesting things going on, including a lot more lighthearted episodes. All right, let's just get into it now, shall we? First Children in the Way of Jesus points out that if we're going to understand Jesus's ministry, we really have to understand how he saw the world. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have as modern Christians is that we have to clear out so much of the detritus that has collected over the last 2,000 years to try to get back to any sense of original meaning, original intent, or original theology in all of this.
In a way, you can think of it as, for those of us that have been walking this earth for a while now, we jokingly amongst our friends will talk about how this person brought their baggage into the relationship. We call it baggage in our common parlance these days, but it's that baggage that the church brings into the relationship. That's really what we're addressing.
It's baggage that has embedded itself in the creeds, doctrine, and dogma, and has really distracted people from a lot of the work, the processing that needs to happen.
And it's that baggage when the church lashes out and hurts an individual, a lot of times it's actually that baggage as the source, or as we're calling it, the unclean spirit.
As Jesus called it.
As Jesus called it, the unclean spirit, is that baggage of the junk, the detritus collected from life that is unprocessed and fuel those moments of hurt.
Bruce Chilton reminds us that Jesus saw the human soul as something that was created good, and that it takes some kind of disturbance, some kind of a rupture within it to manifest, if you will, a unclean spirit.
I think in the common parlance, we would call it trauma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's trauma that he's talking about. It's just, this was language that Jesus didn't have access to. And so when we see, for example, the person who was troubled by the demon legion, for we are many, we've talked about this before on the podcast. It's not a coincidence that the demon's name is Legion. It was the imperial trauma of being subjugated by Rome that caused this person to have this break. And what we see happening here is that trauma being cast out. And of course, it's cast out into the pigs, and the pigs immediately act in a way that is self-destructive. This tells us a lot about everything that's going on here. One, they immediately went into an unclean animal. They not only went into one, but into many. And then they drove themselves into the lake and they die. Yet that self-destructive nature is something that can be born in us all with trauma. Now, the unclean spirits of the church are harder to talk about because we have built so many elaborate doctrines and dogmas around them. And the first trauma is simply that Jesus died. It's very clear that none of the apostles expected that to happen. None of the early followers of Jesus expected that to happen. These are all of the early schisms that took place in the church, all of the arguments in the first 3 centuries, and even afterwards to a certain degree, but especially in the first 3 centuries, revolve around this one collective trauma that Jesus died.
I think the saddest example I see in churches and practitioners is when they go to a state of denial by focusing on the resurrection. Don't get me wrong, love the resurrection. Wonderful, great thing. But to simply and talk about the resurrection means that Jesus died.
Yeah.
It's amazing what, if you were to sit a Christian out, just have them try to say those words. It's like watching the trauma victim trying to process. It's completely unprocessed, even to this day.
And you might think it is. Like, if you're Catholic and you've attended Mass, how many times have you heard, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again? How many times have you heard that either said or sung in Mass? But when I talk about this as the original trauma of the church, most of the arguments were, well, he was crucified, but he didn't feel pain because it would be beneath him to feel pain. And then you start having arguments over the materiality of Jesus's body. Maybe he was crucified and gave the appearance of death and then came back. Maybe it wasn't him at all. Maybe it was Judas. Those stories actually get started really, really early and actually get preserved in the Quran. The version of Christ's crucifixion in the Quran goes back to this very early strain of Christianity that argued that Jesus wasn't actually crucified. They played a shell game, and because the Romans were so racist, they couldn't tell the difference between 2 Jewish men, and so they crucified Judas instead of Jesus. Judas came to betray Jesus and then magically tricked them into taking Judas, and Judas is the one who's arrested and put to death and what have you.
Like, this denial even births one of the earliest heresies in the church when they try to deny any of Jesus's humanity at all. Yeah. Just like, oh, it was just a divine being right from the get-go that,
these are the 3 paths the church goes down. They either have the fully human Jesus, the fully divine Jesus, or the mystic spirit person Jesus. If you've not gone into any of the Nag Hammadi library or other Gnostic texts that have been recovered, there are so many arguments in there that Jesus was truly a spirit being. There's a good argument to be made that the reason Thomas touches Jesus's wounds in the Gospel of John, remember that story is only in the Gospel of John, is not so much to cast shade on the Apostle Thomas, but this Thomasan tradition that had started thinking of Jesus as a spirit person. So in this gospel, we see Jesus eat fish. After the resurrection, we see him eat fish and be touched. They literally touch his wounds and can see, oh no, they are real. He is real. And that was probably more to deal with this argument that he never really had a physical body per se. He was always kind of phantom.
Yeah, I guess to make a pop culture reference, it's almost like Obi-Wan's Force Ghost running around doing things the whole time, though. And it's
one of the tracks that Valentinus gets read for filth about is he wrote a treatise discussing Jesus's bowels. I can understand how he got himself into the theological loop, because if Jesus is God, then God is incorruptible, which means God cannot corrupt. So if Jesus were to eat something, could it corrupt in his stomach and be removed through human ways? You could see the metaphysical logic trap he got himself into thinking about this, right? But at the same time, it's a ridiculous thought process. And it's one that led Valentinus and many others to this place. Jesus had a physical body for the most part, but that Jesus really didn't have to eat, which then caused problems, because how do you deal with the fasting then? He really didn't fast if he didn't really have to eat. And this is where a lot of these stories are playing against these questions in the person of Jesus. And you have this questioning of the material world to such a degree that by the time you get to the Apocryphon of John being written, this Christian community has decided this entire material world had to be created by an evil God. And everything that is material, everything that has substance is just evil. And that argument bleeds through everything within Christianity.
Down to today, where you can hear preachers in church today basically preaching about how all these physical things in our world is evil.
And that's the thing that's really interesting is while they rejected a lot of the other notions that went around with this and did accept a physical Jesus and constructed a method for Jesus to be fully human and fully divine. Remember, this is all theology worked out after the fact, right? Anybody who tries to tell you that this was always the beliefs of the church, you need to read your church history.
300-400 years, multiple councils arguing.
I would say closer to 500-600.
No, you're right, because even after the earliest of the decisions, they then had several heresies pop up that they had to crush.
See, I don't like using the word heresy, but several competing doctrines came up.
Competing doctrines.
Because, and see, that's the point, is they've made it so clear a thought that even today we're still using this word heresy, right? Because it's easier for us to understand because it's the word that we came to associate all these ideas with. And that idea that all things are corrupt, how did things get corrupted? Eve must have done it. So let's blame Eve. If Eve did it, I guess all women did, because you can't come into the world except through a feminine body, right? There's no other way into the world. And gone from questioning the nature of the material world to misogyny. It's all born out of these initial traumas. You can see how their lack of acceptance amongst their fellow Jewish countrymen led them to say, it's important to stress, Paul was Jewish. Paul was raised Jewish. Paul was a Pharisee. Paul was probably a rabbi prior to his conversion. Even Paul in the letter to Romans has to concoct a reason of, look, the other Jewish people just don't get it because, I don't know, God made them stupid. He's in a spirit of stupidity over them. So they just wouldn't get, like, even Paul has to try to justify why everyone didn't just immediately convert, and ends up saying things that we now look back on and read as extremely anti-Semitic, even though he was a Jewish writer. I think Paul lived and died and thought of himself as a Jewish man who followed his Messiah, Jesus Christ. I don't think that you can read Paul and not understand that's how Paul saw himself. But it leads him into these dark anti-Semitic places because of this trauma of, I can see it, why can't you see it? There must be something wrong with you that prevents you from being able to see it. And so I'm going to construct this idea that God must have just sent a spirit of stupor. That's literally the phrases he uses. A spirit of dumb that comes down and just covers their eyes so they can't see. But one day, God will take away that spirit of dumb and they'll all just understand, because he can't accept that he's not accepted anymore, that he has stepped out of the community that he was once in. And these traumas get built in and they get compiled on and they get built on over time. And these form the root unclean spirits of Christianity, one after another.
Yeah, just like you were showing there, where at that same time you had within Judaism, them trying to contend with this weird sect that's saying weird things that they don't necessarily agree with.
And causing all manner of
trouble, because this is a very contentious sect, which is ticking off Rome. And Rome has already come and crushed and killed and annihilated a lot of Jews. Rome is in the process of trying to paint Jews as the villains.
And by the time Paul is writing this letter, the temple hasn't fallen yet. Things are getting to a fever pitch.
They're almost getting to that point.
We're almost to the point of them literally wiping the Jews off the map. They're going to change the name of the land to Philistia. They're going to change the name of Jerusalem. They're going to change the names of the Jewish cities. They're going to ban any Jewish person from going to Jerusalem. Like, all of this is happening in this time period. Flavius is leading his anti-Semitic campaign to prove to the world that the Jews are the most dangerous people ever, so that he can get street cred for being mean to them in his colonizing activities out there. A path that he will ride directly through to the emperor seat. He and his son will both be emperors. The Colosseum was built by him using the money that he stole during his sack of Judea.
Yeah, right from the temple itself.
We see in his triumphal arch them carrying the menorah and various other temple goods through the streets. But all of that, like I said, is just before the sack of the temple, right? And then the temple was destroyed.
which rocks and wounds. It's a trauma on both faiths.
Christianity, it was centered in Jerusalem until the fall of Rome. And then the center of power moves to Antioch and then eventually over to Rome, where it will seat before breaking off between the two Roman capitals and so on. But you can see these layers of traumas. And we, like I said, we're not even to 70 AD yet.
We're not even 50 years later yet.
If Jesus died in 30 AD, we're not even to 70 AD. So we're not even 40 years after his death. And all of this trauma has come in. And these are the spirits we are trying to exorcise because they are rooted deeply within the heart, soul, and psyche of the church.
So I heavily recommend everyone to go and read the article. There's a lot of wonderful detail going through these traumas in the path. This would easily be a 2-part episode if we tried to.
Probably more. There's a part where I skip about 1,000 years of history. We get up to the 300-400s and then we skip forward to Luther and the Protestant Reformation. A lot of things got cut out in the in-between. At the very end of the article, I recommend a self-exorcism, a way to start expelling the spirits that have been added. We give them all names.
And remember that in any exorcism, the point is to fill that space with something positive.
Which the prayer does.
The prayer does, and is so important because that's part of that healing process. If you just banish whatever you're trying to banish without filling that space, it's going to come back into that void, or something worse might fill that void. Power abhors a vacuum.
This is the great struggle that everyone is going through right now, and why it's not good that we forget the pandemic and we forget the housing crisis and we forget the mortgage crisis and we forget the crisis on crisis on crisis,
energy crisis. And it's one trauma feeding another trauma. And people wonder, like in the States, why is the culture like it is? We all have so much baggage that we are trying to ignore or deny or not process. And then we wonder why we end up hurting each other over and over again.
That we are a collective nation of unclean spirits that need to do the work. It is very important that you do therapy. It's very important that you find a good therapist that can help you through things. It is also very helpful to not go to a deliverance ministry, not go to any of the self-proclaimed exorcists that are out there. Most of them are charlatans. They're out to take your money. One of the best things that I ever did for my psyche is when I attended a tarantella to get rid of the little spider bite. This is a practice within the Italian flavor of mystical Christianity, mystical Catholicism. It is a drumming ritual. It is a very meditative, very frenetic drumming ritual that is performed in Italy. And there is something to say for that experience of, I felt my entire body vibrate. Like I felt something just great free inside of me. And it is one of the most liberating experiences that I have ever had. Now, I am not saying that going to a sacred drum circle is a substitute for therapy, and I would never say that, but doing liberation practices is cathartic.
Yeah.
Of what we need in dealing with our trauma is to work through it, to work through the baggage, to work through the thoughts, to work through the trauma, but also to have that embodied experience of catharsis. There are different ways to get there. You may be able to do it through prayer. You may be able to do it through meditation. It may take a ritual like this, and there are quite a few ritualized practices for that. But remember, they're for getting you to a place of catharsis. There is research that has gone into exorcism as a mystical experience and as a psychological phenomenon. Unfortunately, because it is a religious experience, there's not as much research as there needs to be. There's something to be said for the cathartic experience that can be had in these settings. Always be safe, be careful, and do not think of your religious experience as a substitute for therapy and psychological care. It is not. They are complementary. They are not to replace each other.
You don't walk down a path hopping on one foot.
It's true.
Not a comfortable journey.
It's true.
And actually, we don't just use our feet. We also use our hands and arms when we walk. We use many methods for that one means of the journey.
And if you want to look at the early church really dealing with this, the Gospel of Judas really is dealing with this directly. And find yourself a good translation of it. The easiest way to find out if you have a decent translation is who goes to heaven at the end, because the scholarly consensus is Jesus nopes out on everybody and leaves everybody behind at the end of the Gospel of Judas. Remember, the Gospel of Judas is the church talking to itself and has nothing to do with the historical Jesus. It is a political document enraged at the state of the church when it was written in the 3rd century. I would also recommend looking at the Gospel of Mary, which unfortunately for us is extremely fragmentary. One of my great hopes and wishes is that somebody's going to kick a rock and find a much better preserved copy of the Gospel of Mary, or at least more manuscripts that preserve parts that have been lost. But there is an exorcism in the Gospel of Mary. It's very much about the same topic we're talking about today, that in order for us to find that inner peace, that final peace, that eternal peace in the kingdom, getting rid of these demons of fear and doubt and wrath and anger and pain. Neither of these gospels were accepted by the mainstream church. A lot of these ideas ended up getting sublimated into other thoughts of their exterior spirits that are causing problems. Now we're not dealing with the more psychological, deep embodied roots of these feelings. And as somebody who has performed exorcisms in the past, the one thing that is universal in them is that they are a cathartic experience that can often get a person to a point of clarity, at which point they are ready to enter therapy.
Yeah.
Because you have had a catharsis that has allowed you to see your trauma. And sometimes we have to just have that catharsis even to see it. And sometimes that happens from watching a movie, listening to certain kinds of music. There are different ways to have catharsis. It's the lost skill of our time.
Humans are so adept at adapting to sensations. We need that to help our brains process all the data we experience throughout the day. But because of that, say we're living with a mild chronic pain, most of us can end up not even realizing we are living with that pain because we adapt to that pain so well that we don't even realize we have a chronic pain. Think about that time when you're standing and moving around a lot that day, and then you suddenly sit down and you get the moment of relief. And then you suddenly realize, oh man, most people say the phrase, my dogs are barking, my feet are hurting. But I adapted to that so much, you didn't even know that your feet were even hurting to know that you needed to rest them and give them a break. And it wasn't until that release, that catharsis, to be aware so you could make a good choice and rest and heal your feet in that instance.
This is the work that we are about. We are here for liberating the soul. And a lot of the work that we're doing, especially on these Wednesday episodes and with the Wednesday posts over at CreationsPaths.com, is really trying to do the work of exercising the soul of the church, because there are a lot of unclean spirits in there. A lot of these distortions and disturbances have been wrought into the heart of the church through trauma. The sad thing is, it's not always just trauma from outside sources. A lot of times it's trauma it did to itself, especially in later years. I hope that the episode has been helpful for you. Like I said, we go through the very broad strokes history of the church and the issues that it has. If you are wondering who introduced a lot of the misogyny into the church, that's listed. If you want to know where the homophobia got inserted into the church, that's listed in there. I tried to chronicle it as much as I could in a short period of time without spending 100,000 words. I could have spent 100,000 words or more. So definitely check those out. Also, don't forget to let us know what you think about this or any of the other topics that we cover. You can always leave a comment, and I love to read your comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube, Spotify, or CreationsPaths.com, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't notify us, so we won't know. But you can leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to CreationsPaths.com, click on chat, and you can leave a message there, and we will see it, and we will be able to get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars, you can pass our way. We offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both, and you can support us using the Cash App hashtag CreationsPaths. Thank you to everybody who does that. We are ever so grateful. Thank you so much. You all really do help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on our table. If we've ever said anything that's helped you out, please share it with others. That helps us out more than you know. And as we're heading out today, I feel like there's only one true and proper person to pray to, and that is my beloved Bridget. Oh, Bridget, as you keened over your son as he lay dead on the battlefield and taught all of Ireland and the world how to king. Teach us to have that deep catharsis, that deep soul cry that comes from deep, deep down within us, that allows our pain to ring out so that we can exercise it and get it out of the body before it does harm to the soul. Amen.
Amen.